My name is Lucy, and on behalf of the Ann Arbor District Library, I am both honored and excited to be here with Judith Heumann and Kristen Joyner for this Washtenaw Reads event. So I will now introduce Judy and Kristen. Judy Heumann is an internationally recognized disability advocate. She contracted polio in 1949 in Brooklyn, New York, and began to use a wheelchair for her mobility. She was denied the right to attend school because she was considered a fire hazard at the age of 5. Judy soon determined that she, working in collaboration with other disabled people, had to play an advocacy role due to continuous discrimination. Judy was a founding member of the Berkeley Center for Independent Living, which was the first grassroots center in the United States to help launch the independent living movement, both nationally and internationally and globally. She served in the Clinton and Obama administration and was a senior fellow at the Ford Foundation. Judy's story was also featured in the documentary Crip Camp: A Disability Revolution, which was a 2020 award-winning documentary. In 2020, she published her memoir, Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist, written with Kristen Joyner. This memoir was audio recorded by Ali Stroker, who is the first wheelchair actor to perform on Broadway. There is also a young adult version called Rolling Warrior, the incredible, sometimes awkward, true story of a rebel girl on wheels who helped spark a revolution. And I have a copy of that here to show you. Judy is now the producer of The Human Perspective, a podcast and YouTube channel that aims to share the beauty of the disability community. Kristen Joyner graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a BA in comparative literature and set out to try and change the world. After working as a community organizer on the US-Mexican border, managing an HIV policy program with the Senegalese parliament, co-founding a green school, a climate change program, and a media nonprofit that accidentally pioneered a new approach to comprehensive sexuality education, she started writing. In 2015, her agent introduced her to the international disability rights activist, Judy Heumann. Kristen co-wrote Judy's memoir, Being Human, and the young adult version, Rolling Warrior. Being Human has been optioned by Apple TV for a feature film with Oscar-nominated screenwriter Sean Hayter attached to direct. Kristen's writing has also appeared in numerous other outlets, including Ms. Magazine, Stanford Social Innovation Review, and Stuff. She lives in Auckland, New Zealand, with a ragtag assemblage of kids and animals, and continues to be fascinated by people who refuse to accept the status quo. This event is part of the 2022 Washtenaw Reads. The Washtenaw Reads program is a community initiative to promote reading and civic dialogue through the shared experience of reading and discussing a common book. Participating libraries include Ann Arbor, Chelsea, Dexter, Milan, Saline, and Ypsilanti. And before we dive into the discussion of our books tonight, we were going to watch the trailer for the documentary Crip Camp. Judy, did you want to tell us a little bit about that before we view it?
Hello, everybody. We're really excited that so many of you have come to participate in this discussion today. Some of you may have seen the film Crip Camp. And as Lucy was saying, it was nominated for an Academy Award. What I think is important about Crip Camp and why we're showing it in the beginning before our discussion is it gives you like a broader overview of what was going on just within my life, although the book talks about me and many other people. But I think the 2-minute trailer allows you to also see the fun that people were having at this camp, and then follow the trail of many of us as we moved into becoming disability rights leaders. So I think it's a fun way of starting, and I look forward to your looking at it.
What, you want me to tell them what happened? Well, two people got cramps and they're spreading. We were all very hyper about it. And I have to go shower some people.
Executive producers President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama.
I wanted to be part of the world, but I didn't see anyone like me in it. I hear about a summer camp for the handicapped run by hippies. Somebody said you probably will smoke dope with the counselors, and I'm like, sign me up.
Disabled campers play guitar and sing.
Come to Camp Jeanette and find yourself.
There I was in Woodstock.
Campers dance and play baseball.
You wouldn't be picked to be on the team back home, but at Jeanette, you had to go up to bat.
Even when we were that young, we helped empower each other. It was allowing us to recognize that the status quo is not what it needed to be.
Sundance Film Fest winner.
The world always wants us dead. We live with that reality.
At the time, so many kids just like me were being sent to institutions. It was just a continual struggle.
Most disabled people, like myself, are unable to use public transportation.
We needed a civil rights law of our own.
A Netflix original documentary.
A rehabilitation program has been vetoed by the president because it was cost prohibitive.
We decided we were going to have a demonstration.
You get the call to action, to the barricade.
Disabled
A
protesters.
small army of the handicapped have occupied this building for the past 11 days.
So many people from Camp Jeanette found their way into the building.
The deaf use sign language.
The FBI cut off the phones. The deaf people went, we know what to do. That's how we communicated to the people outside the building. The Black Panther Party would bring a hot meal. We were like this.
We are the strongest political force in this country.
Addressing congressmen.
We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
Sit-in participants parade triumphantly.
What we saw at that camp was that our lives could be better.
A child rides his father's wheelchair. Protesters crawl up Capitol steps.
If you don't demand what you believe in for yourself, you're not going to get it.
Crip Camp, a disability revolution.
Would you like to see the handicapped people depicted as people? Excuse me?
In select theaters and on Netflix March 25th. Rated R.
Okay, so that was a little glimpse of Crip Camp, which tells the larger story of the movement towards disability rights, whereas these two books tell sort of your more personal story. Judy, before we get into the details of that, I would like to know how you decided that you wanted to write a memoir, and how did you know that you wanted to find a co-writer? Oh, you're muted still.
Thank you. You know, for many decades, really since the late 60s, 70s, I've done a lot of public speaking, and I've never been a confident writer. And so as I was getting older and had more stories and was speaking to more audiences, people would say, you know, you really need to write a book. And I was really busy, not that I'm still not busy, but it just didn't feel like I had enough to tell. And then I think it was in about 2016 that I had gotten a call from people in a company called Gravity Square wanting to talk with me about the possibility of getting a book written, and would I be interested. They had been talking to someone they had worked with before who I also knew. And they said, I said, well, I can't write it myself. And they said that they were involved with a company that could help me find a writer. And so I thought, okay, there was a lot going on. Hillary Clinton had lost the election. My job was finished. And so it was kind of like a right window where if I could find someone that I could click with, that we'd be able to work on writing the book. So they gave me a number of resumes, and the first person that I called was Kristen. And after having a discussion on the phone, we decided to meet. And I guess that was history.
All right, well, Kristen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how it was that you and Judy started that process together once you decided to meet.
There we go. Well, it was ironic because I was actually living in Berkeley. And I was living a block from the Center for Independent Living, where Judy had been working and where the protest, the 504 protest, was actually planned out of and strategized out of. But I walked through that building every day to get to the BART for my work in San Francisco. And I never recognized the building for what it was. It's called the Ed Roberts Building, who's a very famous activist and one of the leaders of the disability rights movement. And I didn't know who Ed Roberts was. I didn't know anything about the movement. So I got asked if I wanted to meet with Judy to work with her on her memoir. And I didn't realize until the very first meeting that I was living literally on top of where it all happened. So when Judy and I first met in Washington, DC, well, we talked on the phone, and then when we met in person, Judy said to me, why do you want to write my memoir, and what do you know about the disability rights movement? And I was really honest, and I told her the story of how I didn't know anything about it, even though I'd been working in feminism and human rights for most of my career. And I said, I don't understand how this happened. I don't understand how I had this huge gap in my knowledge and understanding. And I want to write your book so that I can immerse myself in your story and really understand what happened and what this movement is all about and try to rectify that, basically. And Judy allowed me to write, even though I didn't have that knowledge. She allowed me to write with her, which was a real honor.
What was the experience for you to like writing this book together, just the collaborative effort?
Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go?
Yeah.
Oh, Judy, you're muted.
I know, but I couldn't unmute myself.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so I think even before we finally agreed to work together, we met at a little restaurant in Washington, DC, and I, having never really thought a lot about writing a book, Kristen doesn't have a disability. And so it was important for me to try to see whether she would be able to listen to me enough to really learn about things that she freely acknowledged she didn't know. And I think that was really something that we, I think in a positive way, struggled with on and off all the time, trying to get the right voice and trying to really see and understand things that were really important to me for the reader. And I think we, we had healthy disagreements. And in the end, I feel like the representation came out really well, and many people relate to some of the extensive detail that we have in the book, which I found very important so that people could kind of be in me as we were going through many of these scenarios. So it also, for me, was a challenging time because having to figure out how I would really express when I liked or didn't like something could be really difficult. Kristen and I were very far apart for most of the writing of the book. So we didn't get to do
far apart. Huh? Geographically far apart.
Yeah, geographically. So in the beginning, when we agreed to work together, Kristen was coming back and forth between San Francisco and Washington, DC. So, we would get together a good number of times, and it was focused on background in the direction of the book, but there was also kind of time just to be talking about whatever. When we were doing everything via Zoom, and when Kristen moved to New Zealand, it wasn't just on Zoom, but it was a day later than where I was in DC. And, she had her life with her family. I had my life with my family. And, as everyone knows, your life goes forward. And so having to be able to make all these things mesh, I think in some way made me stronger, because I had to really be clear about what I wanted and what I didn't want. And I think, we're really able to get that right pitch and mix. And I think for me, it was also, working with Kristen, who is a writer. I'm an extrovert, and writers, I think, frequently have to go within and take time to go off and think and contemplate and put it together. And that's not who I am, but that's one of the reasons why I think it worked out well.
I think one of the things that happened was that because I didn't have a disability, but I had worked in this area of human rights and feminism for so long, I was continually asking myself, why is disability a civil rights issue that's been sort of blanked out by even the social activists in the area in the US
and around the world.
And so I was so when Judy was telling me stories about her life, I was constantly asking myself, why is it that I didn't know that? Or why is it that in all the work that I'd done in all the organizations, that wasn't a topic of conversation among the people I worked with? And so I tried to, as much as possible, make the story or bring out the real universality of what was going on with Judy. I think that ended up being an advantage in our collaboration. So Judy asked me at one point in time, who do you think will read this story? And I said, or who will be interested in it? And I said, anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. There's a deeper theme going on in the story on top of everything else.
I think for both of us, I didn't want this story just to be one that disabled people would want to read rather, sorry. I wanted it to be a story that would help people learn both about aspects of the disability rights movement, one person's story, and in part so that people can begin more to relate to disability as a normal, natural part of life. I think one that people don't really want to think about. I feel very strongly that our movement needs to continue to grow, to be more intergenerational. So as you said, I had polio in 1949. So today I'm 74. So when COVID hit, that really was the first time that I ever felt my age. And I realized, that some of the risks that I had to be careful about were based on the fact that I had polio and I had respiratory involvement, but also that I was 74. And so, all these issues, and hoping that the book would really resonate with an audience from young, like Rolling Warrior, all the way across the lifespan, with being human.
Well, speaking of Rolling Warrior, I found it had such a strong balance of humor and the narrative. There was like explanation and a relatable tone that was never patronizing. And so I was wondering how you two worked to create that voice, and what were the particular challenges of writing like a book for kids, a middle grade book, after you'd written Being Human, and how did you decide what to include, what pieces to highlight and what to put in there?
So I think, when Beacon decided it wanted to do a book for a younger audience, that was really, I think, really exciting for Kristen and myself. And they also had done something like this before with a book about for a younger audience. And so they had started putting together like an advisory group. And so for this book, another advisory committee was put together. And it was made up of 7 or 8 people between the ages of like 9 and 16. And it was a racially diverse group of people with a number of them had disabilities, not all of them. So I think that balance was also to make sure that the story would be interesting to a cross sector of people. And then Kristen met with them on a regular basis. You want to go from there?
Yeah, so they really helped with the voice. They were very outspoken. And so we would meet every Saturday morning and they would read. So I would send them something and then they would, an excerpt that had been written the week before, and then they would read it out loud, and then they would give very vocal feedback about what worked and didn't work. And so right away, some of the feedback that we got was that, this really needs to be a story. There's a lot of stories that young people are reading that are about sort of, like solving problems or taking on the world, like the Percy Jackson series, for example. And so right away, what they said to us was, you need to really show young people that this is what Judy was doing. She was really taking on the world. And it was sort of these underdogs, which were people with disabilities taking on the world. And so that sort of gave birth, that they were the ones who gave us the very first sentence of the prologue, which is basically that if I'd been born 10 years earlier, I would have been killed by Nazis. And then it in sort of right away positions the group of disability activists as sort of being that group that's going to change everything and refuse to accept the status quo. So yeah, so that was really, they had a huge role in creating that voice.
That's really interesting. Well, speaking of that intro for Rolling Warrior, Judy, I wanted to ask you, what was your parents' influence on your future as an activist? Because you talk about that in both books.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was 18 months old when I had polio. And when I had polio, there are 3 kinds of polio, and I had all 3 kinds of them. And so I was in an iron lung for about 3 months, and in and out of hospital till I was about 4.5 years old. And I don't really remember much about it, but my parents, both of my parents were refugees from Germany, were Jewish. And my mom was an only child, and she was sent to live with a distant relative in Chicago that she didn't know. And my father was sent to live with family in Brooklyn that he did know. And my dad was in the military, he fought in the Second World War in the Marines. And then they met in 1945 when my dad was being discharged. They met in Philadelphia. And I give this level of detail because I think it gives people a little bit of sense of who they were. They met in Philadelphia. My father's brother lived on this street, which turned out to be a street that my mother had a distant relative living in. And both my father's parents and my mother's parents and other relatives were killed in concentration camps. So when they met, my father started writing letters to my mother. Everything was done through letter writing, including proposing. And when my mom said yes, my father went out and met the relative. And then they got married. They lived in Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia. Then they went to Brooklyn. They bought a house in a middle-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, and they were off. My father was working as a butcher, and he and his brother were going to set up a butcher store. And then I had polio, and my mother was pregnant with my brother, 8 months pregnant. So, things were quite up in the air, I presume. But they really made a decision early on that they were going to raise me the same way they would have raised me had I not had polio. Although I think what was very important, that statement was kind of an easy thing to say. When a doctor recommended I be put in an institution, they said no. And as the book says, of course they wouldn't have put me in an institution given what had gone on during the Holocaust. But they didn't really know what it meant when they said no. And they said, they want me to have the same thing as everybody else, because that's not what laid in the cards. And so, my mother takes me to school when I'm 5 years old, expects nothing from the Department of Education, pulls me up the steps to go to the school, and the principal says no. And so I think, you see my mother and father's resilience at trying to figure out what to do. Because remember, this was the 1950s. There were no laws on the books that protected disabled people in any way, shape, or form. And so they kind of continued to move forward and really began to become champions on issues, even though that's not the way they entered the room. They didn't enter the room with the thought that they were, strong, courageous, and blah, blah, blah. They'd never done that. And so I think my parents really represent many, many, many parents, even in the United States today, and who happen to have disabled kids or others. If your child is being denied opportunities because of a bias, in many cases, strong parents will really resist and fight back. So for me, that was one of the very important parts, not only of my parents and the role models they were for me, but I think very much to highlight the important role that families can play with their children or other family members who may acquire a disability.
I think it was really important that Judy's parents refused to believe that Judy was the problem from day one. They always thought it was the system. They thought it was the system that was wrong. And I think that was something that Judy definitely always believed too. That was different from a lot of other families with kids with disabilities.
And I think, the other issue is they never thought about systems. I think as they were more involved, and when I finally did get to go to school with other disabled kids when I was 9, and they were meeting other parents who were having the same experiences, I think, families were very isolated from each other. So my parents didn't know any other family that had a kid in a wheelchair who was sitting at home, with an hour, 2.5 hours a week of education from the school system, because they didn't know any other parents who had disabled kids until I finally was going to the segregated class. And I think then, my mother was finally in an environment where she could talk to people and try to figure out what was going on. And that's when she found out that because I was a wheelchair user, none of the high schools in New York City were accessible. So what was supposed to happen was I and anybody else who would have gone on to high school were going back on home instruction. But the other thing at this point, which is in the book, is I went to a health conservation 21 classes, all disabled children, in a regular school. So in the basement were the special ed classes. Upstairs were all the classes for non-disabled children. And the non-disabled children went through 6th grade, and then they went to junior high. The disabled kids stayed in that program until they were 21. And then they went on to sheltered workshops. So my mother was not about to let me stay in this program and not go to high school. And she was meeting other mothers who felt the same way. And that's when they went to the Board of Education. I think that was a really important step for my mom, excuse me, and other mothers and fathers, that some things couldn't be fixed at the most local level. And I think that's really how myself and many of my friends, we were learning indirectly from what our parents were doing, that it was an onion and there were many layers, and sometimes you could get what you wanted just by dealing with one layer, and sometimes you had to really get to a much higher level to be able to achieve things. And I did go to high school, and I was the first kid in my health conservation 21 classes to go to high school.
Well, hearing how they sort of championed the issues, at what point was there a moment for you when you realized that you were going to have to also, champion those issues that affected you and others? Maybe there wasn't one moment, several moments.
I mean, I think it was gradual, because I think one of the important parts about Crip Camp is, you can see that this group of people, we came together at camp for like 4 weeks, in some cases 8 weeks. And our experiences were not really that different than other kids who went to summer camps, except we went to a camp for disabled kids because the regular summer camps were not accessible. And so, kids, as they were going into junior high school age and high school, people started talking about, what were you thinking about doing when you grew up, right? At 5 years old, what are you going to be when you grow up? Most people didn't ask disabled kids, oh, what are you going to be when you grow up? Or they certainly didn't take asking of the question in the same way that they might have for non-disabled children. And, so as we were early teens and teenagers, we began to see that our lives were becoming more restricted, because on the one hand, our non-disabled friends and family were beginning to do things like go on buses, get picked up in somebody's car, go out to the movies or various places, go over for a sleepover at someone's house. But in many cases, the fact that the streets didn't have curb cuts, there weren't elevators in many places, there were steps abounding. We started questioning, why is this? Why aren't there buses that are accessible? Why aren't the trains accessible? Why are we in schools that are separate? And even when we go to schools that are the same, where we're disabled and non-disabled kids, in many ways, we also feel different because of the way the disabled kids may be treating us. So that was a great time to begin to think about, what do we want the world to look like? And I think the older we got and the more we felt that we could make a difference, the more we did that, got involved in influencing. And I think for me, in college, I was involved in like I was involved in the sorority, I got on school student government, I was involved in anti-war activities, and I was involved with student strikes around tuition, and I was on the school, the student council. So I was learning there, and then really beginning to work with other disabled people in my university. We had no disabled student service office, and there were all kinds of issues around accessibility. And so we came together and began to demand that the university set up a program. So it was little by little. And I think the biggest aspect for myself was when I was denied my right to be a teacher. And that was like the cornerstone of, I had to make a decision. I did everything I was supposed to do to get my license. I passed my written and oral. All the exams were given in inaccessible buildings. And then I was failed on the medical exam. And so when I was able, it was a fluke that I found an attorney, but once that got rolling, it wasn't just for me, because I was meeting so many other people who were talking about experiences they were having in discrimination, in employment, in housing, in transportation, education. And I think really around 21, 22, for me, that's when things really started moving, because we were able to set up our own organizations and begin to set agendas and, begin to do things on our own.
Well, so you had, you started change there, and you had a role in so many other changes, and like the passage, the 504, and the passage of the Americans with Disability Act. But I was wondering what some of the lessons you learned were during that time about how change happens, because this is something that struck me when I read your book. There's the idea and then the implementation. So
can I add, sorry, Judy, before you answer that, just to add something onto what Judy just said previously. I think that's a really good question about change. And I think that moment before you launch into the lessons about change, that moment that you were talking about when Judy was denied her license to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's like, those are words, right? For anyone who that's never happened to, those are words, right? But then when you really think about what it must have felt like, when I imagined at that time, what it would have felt like for Judy to have to stand up publicly as a 22-year-old who had never taught and say, I can teach, give me my teaching license. I think there are very few 22-year-olds who would be willing to stand up in front of the, New York City and the entire world and fight for the right to teach. I think that was the moment where Judy talked a lot when we were sitting down and talking, and in the book about, that was a moment where it was like, do I or don't I? Am I going to stand up or not? And that really launched, and then winning that lawsuit really changed, I think, was a huge pivot point for Judy. Sorry, Judy, I just wanted to add.
No, and I think it's right. And I think it also leads back to the question that you were asking, Lucy, because what I was learning about through that lawsuit was what the bigger picture was and what needed to be done for change. So I get a piece of paper, it says I can't be a teacher. It doesn't say anything about you can appeal it this way. That was it. And so actually, I had been in touch in my freshman or sophomore year with the American Civil Liberties Union, because friends of mine had said, you're going to have difficulty getting a job as a teacher. So I thought, I didn't know who they were.
Because she was told she was going to have, because there were
we didn't know any other people who were teaching who were using wheelchairs.
So the students with disabilities were supported by the Department of Rehabilitation in their studies, but they were only supported as long as they were committed to careers where other disabled people had been successful previous to them. And since there were no teachers
That we knew.
that they knew of that were using wheelchairs, then she was told she couldn't be a teacher because it didn't exist.
But because I had called the ACLU and they had said, well, if anything happens, call us. So after I got that letter, I called them and they said they'll call me back. And I said, I want to come down and talk to the lawyers. And they came back and said there was no need to come down for a meeting because I hadn't been discriminated against, that I was denied my license on medical grounds. Now, for those of you who know anything about disability law, there were no laws in place at that time. There was no federal 504 ADA. So that pretty much, sent me back. Okay, I'm learning about the system. I went to ACLU because they've got lawyers and they can sue. I didn't know any lawyers who had been involved in litigation, but I was beginning to try to learn more about the system. Now, when I got a call from a lawyer, okay, so a friend of mine worked for the New York Times as a stringer, and he was a disabled guy. And he got a reporter in the New York Times to write an article about my being denied my license. And the next day there was an editorial in the New York Times saying, basically, give me my license. And then I got this call from a lawyer named Roy Lucas, who wasn't calling me to represent me, but was calling me to say, oh, I'm writing a book and I didn't know anything about discrimination and disability. Talk to me about it. So I did. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I said to him, would you represent me? And he said, yes. And so why that's relevant, Lucy, to the question you asked me, is that's how I was beginning to learn about the system. I was learning about media. I knew nothing about media. I didn't get the story in the paper. That day that the article was in the New York Times, I got a call from the Today Show asking me if I would be on the Today Show. The first article was on a Wednesday and this was on a Friday. And I remember thinking, it's a national television program. I've never been on a radio show or on a television program. And I just decided I can do it, I have to do it. So, you take advantage of things, but step by step, there's so many different events that occur in rights-based movements. And I think, what I have learned over the decades is there are certain things that you can look at doing, right? Getting your facts correct, having other people that are experiencing similar issues, trying to create agenda for change, meeting with legislators, meeting with media. But it'll vary depending on what the issue is. But part of it really is the ability for me to have a group of people that I can be working with, where we have a similar vision of what we believe the problem is and what we believe the solutions are. And both with 504 and the ADA and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and on, there is this bond that brings people together. And it certainly in no way, shape, or form has resolved all the problems. But I think you can see this model of education, articulation, expressing, and working on change has, not just in disability, but in other civil and human rights areas, been making important changes over the decades. And typically it's because it's one person it's not one person. It's many people who are really coming together where there is like a bond of what people are willing to risk. And I think when we look at the 504 demonstrations, there was a lot of unknowns. You know, when we went in the building, most people didn't know we were gonna go in the building and stay overnight. Only a couple of us had been thinking about that. And then it became something where we stayed like for more than 26 days. So flexibility and strong belief.
Kristen, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think that one of the things that a few things really struck me. One is that Judy had, so coming from my perspective, Judy had a really strong faith in the government. She didn't, when she decided that the system was wrong and it needed to change, she didn't start a business, she didn't, lots of people today would take different approaches to social change. But Judy and her fellow activists were really focused on, we can change the government. The government is us. We create the government and we can change it. And
I think that's very important. It's this issue of not that we believe the government is right all the time at all. Quite frankly, it's frequently we don't believe that what they're doing is right. But it is a system that does have responsibility and needs to grow and evolve. And its responsibility is to protect the rights of people in our country, city, county, town, state, federal. And I think really, in part because my parents and family came from Germany, and we saw, what happens in a system like the Nazis had and other countries after, that we very much believe in like voting, the right to vote, and ensure that all people who are able, who wish to vote can vote. And so, I was 18 when I voted first, and my father had to pull me up steps to get me in to vote. And that was very important, voting for us, voting in our family was always an obligation. And it really was, you could be at home and you could be cussing out whatever representative wasn't doing what you wanted them to do. But there was really, and is really, a belief that there are representatives.
Judy always says, she said really frequently to me when we were writing the book, a collective problem must be solved collectively. And I think there are a lot of issues in society today where you could look at them and we're told there are a lot of collective problems, and we're sort of taught, or we're sort of told in some ways, that we as individuals can solve collective problems. Like if you take just as an example, climate change. If I don't drive as an individual, I can solve this collective problem. But what Judy, and the thing is to solve a collective problem as a collective, it really is the government. That is the sole entity that has been created to represent every single person in our country. And so I think that was that belief. And so Judy really, one of the things that really impressed me when we were writing the book was that she really believed in that, number one. And then number two, she really understood that kind of change is slow. It's like a lever that you push and push, or pull, push and push down, push, push, push. And it feels like you're not getting anywhere and you're not getting anywhere. And then it's like the Titanic, when it turns, it really turns.
But it also meant, and you see this in the 504 activities and ADA activities, it meant consistency. It meant meeting new people. It meant getting more people who could articulate the problem, people who would be able to meet with legislators and government officials and government civil servants and really allow people to understand what we were talking about. Because I think in the area of disability, discrimination was really not understood. And so one of the important aspects of what's gone on with Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act and other laws is that we had to be able to convince legislators that the discrimination wasn't infrequent, but that it was systemic, and that it happened to people of all ages with all types of disabilities. And we needed to be able to document not only what those actions were, but also to be able to talk about how to address them, how to prevent them from happening. So, I mean, you know, we're living in different times than when I was growing up. And the ability for people to talk together and to work on solutions, I think is very important. And I worry a lot about some of the divisiveness that's going on. It feels different to me than whatever happened before, but nonetheless, I still believe very much in the responsibility of government. I mean, I worked in government, you know, when I was in the Department of Education and in the State Department, and I always felt that it was my obligation to do as much as I could do to make sure that families of children with disabilities were being appropriately served in education, disabled people seeking employment, that the agencies that they were working with did their jobs appropriately. And we live in a big country, so none of these things are easy.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I think Rolling Warrior is so great, is that you're giving that message to kids about the idea that, you know, you can work collectively to start to make change to a collective problem. And just we're gonna, in a second, open it up to questions. But before we do that, I want to pivot back to the books for one question, which is, did either of you, or what did you learn about yourself, something new that while you were writing the book?
I learned that I could, well, in part, I learned I could write. I could never write the book by myself, but Kristen, we would talk, she would write, she would send it back to me, and I would, in many cases, like spend time working on writing the story as I wanted to see it. So that was important. And for me also, what I learned is that this story is resonating with a very broad swath of people. And I think when we were working on the book, we did share it with a number of people to get an understanding of what people thought about it as it was moving forward. And we did try to get a diverse group of people, both disabled individuals who I wanted to read the book to make sure that I was striking the right balance, and non-disabled people who maybe knew nothing about the story or a little bit about the story now, not just mine, but the movements. So reinforced for me the importance of needing more literature and more films and others that people can be seeing to really learn about authentic stories and to really try to change the message that all too frequently is out there, where either disability is pretty invisible, or when it's visible, it can be quite negative.
I mean, I think that I learned, I had sort of absorbed a lot of the myths about disability unconsciously. I think that I sort of unconsciously assumed when I didn't, for example, there were no kids with disabilities in my, but I remember, you know, visible disabilities in my elementary school when I was growing up. And I think, or in my work, you know, places of work. And I think that I had never thought about that, number one, which is, you know, something I learned about myself. And then number two, I assumed that they weren't present because they had medical issues. I had really absorbed that whole sort of medical myth that, and also I had sort of, I think society sort of has, one of the things that Judy and her, a fellow, friends and activists did is they said, they kept saying, it's not us, it's society, right? And so I think that I had sort of taken in society's perspective that if a place isn't accessible, oh, well, that's a problem for the person who can't access it, or it's too bad that they can't access, it's too bad that, they have to use a wheelchair because they can't access it, rather than I had never flipped that paradigm and thought, oh no, actually, it's a collective problem. It's a societal problem. We don't have a universal world that's accessible for everybody. So I had all of these myths. I also had the myth in my head when we started. I think that because disability has been so marginalized, even in the social activist circles of civil rights and human rights, that there's some sort of, and because it's associated with the medical, or because we assume that people with disabilities are sick in some way, and that's why they're not out, and that's why we don't see them more in society, which is a myth, not true. I think that society sort of has in some ways relegated disability as a sort of a subject they don't have to pay attention to, that's uninteresting, or that it's bland in some way. And I think that was definitely a myth that I had. So in writing the story and working with Judy, I was just really, of course, every day I was thinking, wow, I was so wrong. This is fascinating. This is, enormously interesting and important. Anyway, so those were some of the things that I learned about myself.
Well, thank you for that. I think I have more questions I could ask, but I think we should open it up to the audience for some questions. So as we move towards that, I want to remind people in the audience that in order to move the Q&A smoothly, if you can keep your mic muted and your camera off. And then if you have a question, you can raise your hand using that feature in Zoom, and we can unmute you. If you don't want to ask a question that way, you could put a question in the chat that we can read. So.
Carolyn Growe has their hand up.
Okay.
Hi, Judy. So wonderful to see you, and wonderful to see everybody in Ann Arbor. I am always curious, Judy, the piece of the motivation side, and how we can get everybody to be more motivated to continue the charge that you and others have led, and to be able to get the next generation engaged enough to carry it forward for disability rights.
I feel like it's important to enable people to talk about changes they want to make in their lives, and for them to learn. Most people acquire their disabilities when they're older. So I think it's really allowing people to recognize that they have a right to be able to contribute and to participate, and that acquiring a disability doesn't mean that your desire to be an active person in community gets switched off. And then I think it's really important that disabled people meet other disabled people, get support from each other. And, one issue that I've been talking more and more about is how people who currently don't have a disability need to really recognize that disability is a normal part of life. And as such, it's likely that you or someone close to you will acquire one or more disabilities over the course of your life, whether it's temporary or permanent. So like, how many of you have ever broken your arm or your ankle or your leg, or been injured in a bicycle accident, or are 60 or 70 or 80 years old today and can no longer go up and down the steps in your home? And what are people doing to begin to realize we don't have to be building homes that have all these steps? Like, what is the beauty of steps? And people will be losing their hearing, some people, and low vision. And what is it that we need? Why is captioning so important? And what about people who have invisible disabilities, depression or anxiety or long COVID or whatever it may be? We need to be enabling people who have disabilities to feel that it is the right thing to speak up and that they have support to do that.
I think young people really respond to the fact that this is a social justice issue. Young people don't necessarily believe that one day they may acquire a disability, but they don't like injustice, and they're very passionate about social justice. When they realize that this is a justice issue, social justice issue, they become very motivated to change things.
That's true for kids. But I was also saying that, you get to a point in your 20s and 30s and you may not be thinking about that. You're thinking about buying a new house. You're thinking about buying whatever it may be. And I think if people really want to start living in their neighborhoods, if you look at the fact that of the more than 900,000 people who have died from COVID, more than 200,000 of those are people who've died in nursing homes and other congregate living settings. So, the data bears out that being able to live in the community with appropriate supports helps ensure greater life expectancy. We've got Tom Hotlin, Heather Bannett, Jim Mogensen.
We have some questions in the chat too.
Yeah, it's Tom Hotlin, Judy. Nice to see you again. So I wonder if it's a two-part question, but I wonder if you realized when you were in high school and your parents had pushed you through to, let's call it mainstream education, did you realize the enormity of what you were doing as far as paving a way for people behind you or that would come behind you, and so forth? And then the other question is, high school's tough on everyone, especially if you look differently than others. And I'm wondering, were you labeled a troublemaker? Didn't leave well enough alone? Because we're misunderstood as advocates a lot of times, and it's just easier to ignore us or ignore us. So those are the two sort of questions that go together.
So I would say no. When I was just getting involved, we did realize with the 504 demonstrations that and other demonstrations that we've been involved in New York and in the Bay Area, on some level, one of the reasons we tried to get as many people engaged as possible is because we did recognize that the more people that were involved, the louder the message would be. And so that was really important. But we did it because we also very much believed in what I was saying earlier, which is people articulating themselves, what they see as the problem, what they see as solutions, empowers them to be able to do more, and then empowers the group as a whole. So I think all of that is really important. I mean, high school was a really difficult time because I'd been only either not in school or in segregated classes. Right. So when I went from being in my bedroom, until I was 9 years old, to then going to classes where there were 8 to 10 to 12 kids in gradeless classes, and then going to high school where most of my classes had 30 or more children, that in and of itself was very scary. And that, high school was not in many ways, the most joyous part of my life, while in school. But I learned a lot in many different ways. And I think now things are different because more disabled kids are going to regular schools. They've got some different issues, but I think they're also getting a different strength than many of us who were in segregated programs got. They're meeting people with and without disabilities, some people who are, supportive and see this as a human rights issue, justice issue, or just you're my friend and I want to deal with it that way, to other people who, ignore you and can ridicule one. But yeah, I think our laws are really slowly making a difference. In 1975, the federal government acknowledged that at least 1 million disabled children were not in school. And I'm sure the number was larger, but acknowledging that was very important. And then I think we're seeing some important changes with Section 504 in the ADA and other laws. You're muted.
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat, so I can go ahead and read one of those. Joan asks, do you think it is important to shift our language from disabled to differently abled?
No, I hate differently abled. I hate any word, anything that uses the word able. Everybody is differently abled. I don't know who you are. You may be a great basketball player, but then you're probably not a good football player. And it doesn't mean you're less of a person. And I think the word disability is not a negative word. We need to own that word. I see it as something that's a unifying term. I have a physical disability. I can't walk. Therefore, for me, ramps and accessible bathrooms and movie theaters and other things are very important. Deaf people, sign language and captioning is very important. Blind people have other things that they need, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, on and on. And I think for me, we are the only group where people are always talking about what word should we be called, and taking us away from the really meaningful discussions that we need to get into. So from my perspective, I use the term disabled people. Some people use the term people with disabilities. For me, that's the be all and end of the discussion. I hate the word abled. Sorry, I'm from Brooklyn and I say what I think because I'm so upset about some of these words. Because the thing is, people, the first thing, and I don't mean you, because we're on this discussion, so it's an appropriate question, but I was giving a talk in Vietnam when I was working at the World Bank for World Bank staff, all about what we were doing at the World Bank, what the issues of poverty and disability were. And it was a pretty in-depth presentation. And there was a guy, he's like 20 some years old, Vietnamese, who says, what should I call you? So I thought, well, he doesn't know my first name. Should he call me Judy or Judith? And I said, well, you can call me Judy or Judith. And he said, no, do I call you differently able, the able disabled, the handy capable? And I was like, I didn't want to attack this guy. He was asking an innocent question. But I said to him, I hope that you listen to what I was talking about, because I was in Vietnam to talk about what the World Bank office in Vietnam needed to be doing to more effectively be including disabled people in the poverty reduction that was going on in Vietnam. When people get stuck on being afraid of what word to use and can't get into the substance, that's a problem. So really, as I said, disabled people, people with disabilities, deaf people, whatever, but some of these terms are just harmful.
We can answer a question from someone with their hand raised. I think Heather has had her hand up.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi Judy, thank you so much for being here with Ann Arbor. My name is Heather, and I'm wait, maybe I can turn on my cam. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Can you see me now?
no.
Oh, there we go. They had to request it special. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, going through college for me, like I would say like I feel like I'm joining this younger generation that really cares about disability justice. And so seeing your film during the pandemic was like everything. I was like, wait a minute. And then I got connected with my disability center in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and now I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I hope to get connected again with the independent living here. But yeah, I just wanted to say like, thank you. And like, I guess my question for you is specifically about like, how we can keep coming together with people who like me, who have like severe like medical trauma and disabilities. And you wrote about that in your book, and that part just like really, I feel like you were like amplifying the experiences of many in the doctor's office. So yeah, I guess if you could just speak to that, that's my question.
I mean, I think it's one step at a time, and you clearly show that you both identify as being a disabled person, that you know about different organizations that you're working with, and that you're on the right path. I think it's very important to continue to think about what your areas of interest are, the amount of energy that you have to work into different things, work on different issues, if you're in school or if you're working, if you're also dealing with health-related issues that might impact your energy level or not. And I think the importance of not feeling alone. So, and really thinking, okay, these are the things that I'd like to change. What would I like to start with? Or who is doing work in the community in organizations that I'm involved with, where I respect and like the people? What are they working on, and what can I start working with them on? Looking at getting on boards of directors, on committees, making sure that what you're studying is being inclusive of disability. And at the end of the day, to have confidence in yourself that the work that you're doing for yourself will also benefit others when you're working with others.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think definitely just specifically what you said about like just getting connected and just like trusting that I'm on the right path. Like that means a lot, because a lot of people around me, they don't get it at all. Right. So thank you for making me feel less alone.
And your path may change. I think that's, very important also. Yeah. It's our paths change, and that's okay. And it may stop and go somewhere else and then come back.
We're getting a lot of questions in both the chat and hands raised, but I wanted to unmute Kevin, because I think this is Kristen's brother. Yes.
Yes, it is.
I'm gonna get him unmuted. Okay.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So great book. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to say, so one of my closest friends when I was a young adult, from about 18 to 30, was a woman named Rachel Hitch. She had osteogenesis imperfecta. She passed away when she was 30. She was a wheelchair user, and just like the way we just spent so much time together, and like we would go hang out at parties and do all the things that people do when they're young adults, like drink and have fun and just relax. And I thought that really came out well in the book, like just the human, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that just like you were experiencing life. And I just thought that was an amazing part of the book that I really appreciated. So And I just want to say, I really, it's too bad she isn't here to like, to see the book, and just, I really think about her every time I see you talk, so.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, we are getting close to the end of our time, so we just have time for a few more questions. I'm going to ask one that is in the chat. Deborah wants to know, how does the visibility look among teachers today? Many children still do not see teachers with disabilities, I would think.
I would say that the education field is one of the worst. There are more disabled people who are teaching, but the numbers aren't significant. I have some friends that are teaching at university who are also wheelchair users in education, but there's a lot more to do for sure. And I think it's very important that our teachers reflect the diversity of our communities. So everyone who has a disability will not necessarily have a visible disability. But one of the issues around disability is that there's both a fear and shame factor. People are afraid of disclosing their disabilities in many ways because they're afraid of adverse actions, non-promotions, evaluations that may be askew based on bias. And that also brings about fear. So I think one of the values of really understanding who we are as disabled people and allowing people with invisible disabilities to feel more comfortable, some with diabetes or a learning disability or ADHD or cancer or leukemia, or, there are hundreds and hundreds of different types of disabilities. And the more we can disclose and not be afraid of something adversely happening, the more it allows us as a community to recognize also how common disability is and how it can affect people in many different ways. I think the whole issue of long COVID is one that we really have to pay attention to, because we're beginning to get more data on the effects of COVID. And, I am a believer in vaccinations. I had polio before there were vaccinations. I know that as soon as the vaccination came out, I was vaccinated, as were my brothers. So for those people who haven't been vaccinated and have had COVID, and for those people who have been vaccinated and who have had COVID, we are beginning to get better information on what they are now calling long COVID, which can be, we're not sure yet because it's still so new, but physical effects, respiratory effects, muscle effects, foggy brain, all types of things that may be only for a short period of time. Like with people who had polio, there were like a large number of people who had the virus, but appeared not to have any effect or limited effect. But many years down the road, started having an effect from the virus. They called it, post-polio syndrome. And so one of the reasons why I speak so much about the need for people to get vaccinated is because of what I know happens and what we will begin to see more prominently as people who've survived COVID may or may not be impacted by the virus long term. And that's going to mean more than ever that we really are on top of things like accessibility, accommodations in the workforce, maybe people who've been affected by this may not be able to work a typical 40 week. They may need to be doing things differently. And we're going to need to be able to look at being appropriately flexible to meet their needs. Because it's what, 900,000 people who've died, but millions and millions of people who've had the virus.
Well, I am appreciative of how many questions we are getting. I think we have time for just one more. So we're going to go back to the raised hands. And I think it was Jim who was next. And then that's going to have to be our last question.
Okay, so so I just wanted to say that you've reminded me on how amazing networks are. I stumbled across this. My mother was a pediatric nurse in New York City in the late 40s and worked at St. Luke's and Willard Parker. The other was I was on a completely different thing, that network conversation last night that just happened to have a disability activist talking, Chris from Buffalo, and he just happened to mention Crip Camp, and I just stumbled across this looking through my email and ended up on the line.
Wow.
And the last thing I'd like to say is that, and this comes up with, I remember there was an anniversary of an ADA, and one of the challenges was I was surprised that I wasn't able to get, I think it was Lives Worth Living, that there's a need to in the disability community to work with some of those groups so that the libraries can make those accessible. Like I don't have access to Netflix and and that kind of stuff. And so maybe, you know, if there's a way to work with the libraries and come up with some solutions so that when we're doing these kind of projects, the licensing stuff can be figured out. Thank you.
So you can see Crip Camp on YouTube. You don't have to do it through Netflix.
Yeah,
but on Lives Worth Living, if I could explain, Lives Worth Living does charge to purchase the film. But Jim, your point is really great. Lives Worth Living is another documentary, and it's a very good documentary. It's very different than Crip Camp. It was supported through the Independent Lens. But I know the people who made the film, and one of the reasons they have to charge it is because they have a huge loan they have to pay off. So, but I think it's a great point. And I think the libraries probably could buy copies of it.
Well, thank you to everyone for all those questions. And on behalf of Ann Arbor District Library and all of the Washington Reads partners, I would like to thank you, Judy, and you, Kristen, for being here today to tell us about your books. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you. And I want to—
But I really want to thank you, Lucy.
Oh.
And I want to thank the library system and the 190 or 200 people that joined. I mean, this is just phenomenal, and it speaks to all of your good work. So thank you, really.
And I want to remind everyone too that you can watch this recording at aadl.org/beinghuman, and human is HEUMANN. So thank you for joining us now, and you'll have a chance to watch it. And thanks again, Judy and Kristen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.